I'll surprise you guys with a cloaca out of nowhere.
A cloaca out of nowhere.
Okay, that's fine. We'll just keep it at that.
Warning, this podcast contains violence, sexuality, gore, and other horrible and disturbing things. Listener discretion is advised. Also, the hosts of this venture are ignorant dipshits, so please do not take anything they say as fact. And enjoy the show.
Now, are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then we'll begin.
Today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be.
The atoms in your left hand probably came from a different star than your right hand.
It is our basic human right to be fucked up.
A second plane now has crashed into the other tower of the World Trade Center.
Put chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
The defendant shall be incarcerated for the rest of her natural life with no possibility of parole.
You are not machines. You are not cattle. You are men.
We were somewhere around Barstow, on the edge of the desert, when the drugs began to take hold.
Occultae Veritatis.
Surprise you guys with a cloaca out of nowhere.
Welcome to Occultae Veritatis. I am Ood Gallifrey.
Such Murray.
Leon Pilger.
And in studio with us,
Missy.
Richard Bigley.
And Declan the Wizard.
Now, we're packed with a full house here, so there's a lot of voices, and it's good because this isn't a very complicated episode. Basically, I just looked at the ancient history of execution and basically all the ways that humans decided to deliver death via punishment to people throughout history.
Fantastic.
Yes. But before we dive into that, we have to get into a little bit of poison.
So, what's your poison?
What's your poison?
Okay. So it was right after basic training. I was stationed up at Cold Lake Camp. Down in the officer's lounge, one of the officers who'd been there a few more years handed me a bottle of this, and he said, "Here, I bought it for you." I thought it was a gift. It was not. This, I don't know what they did to make this so Novocaine-like. Like, this makes your... Now, I bought it because I recognized the elephant on the bottle, so maybe this isn't the exact beer. Maybe I'm remembering wrong, but if I remember correctly, it's like Novocaine infects your tongue.
Ooh, Leon hates it. It is like a double IPA, so it's probably pretty bitter.
It smells pretty IPA.
You smell pretty IPA.
Now,
That's what she said.
It is indeed.
Now, every sip is a kick in the mouth for this beer, and you're going to need it for this episode, because this episode... Yep.
Jesus.
Yep.
I'm so excited.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want
Richard Bigley's literally dying.
Yes, I don't want this phrase to go too far because I reserve it for only powerful things, but this is a beer that'll put hair on your chest.
I can't wait.
Oh, yeah.
I'll measure my chest hair before and after.
Help me. And there's a second bottle, and I'm told the people that enjoy this beer, which I've talked to on the internet, they say that it gets better with every sip, so we're going to check that fucking theory.
This is good.
Yeah. Oh, we should say...
No, it's not.
Oh, no, this is really good.
We should say what this is. Phillips Amnesiac Double IPA.
No one enjoys this beer.
No, I do. I like it.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. I really like IPAs, though, so...
She just got to be contrary. That's just in her nature.
Shut up.
I think this is what skunk piss tastes like.
Oh,
You're what skunk piss tastes like.
Okay.
Like
now.
Sorry, I just met you.
You're just FYI, you're not coming in too clear on the headset.
Oh, yeah.
So like, get in. See how close I am?
Herpes rain.
Get in there. Just get
Right
fucking.
there.
There
Right
you
there.
go.
Yeah.
Let your mustache graze it gently.
Yes.
There you go.
I'm going to have a mustache after drinking this beer.
If I found this in a white bottle, I would ask where the MSDS was.
It's like there's this initial shock, and once it coats your mouth and it becomes the only thing you can taste or smell or feel.
You guys are wieners.
Every subsequent step or every subsequent drink isn't all that bad, you know, because like the worst of it's already you've been exposed to it. You know, it's kind of like if you had like 3rd degree burn and, somebody just kept burning you at that point, there's nerve damage.
Yeah,
it doesn't
fuck
matter.
whatever. I'm already burned.
You're already burned. There's no coming back from this.
In other words, Stockholm Syndrome.
Yeah.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, it's Stockholm Syndrome, the
That's
beer.
exactly what it is.
You know what? My
I thought
foot
that was all beer.
I get that. You know what? My foot looks like charcoal. You can pinch my toes if you want. I get that. It's already done. Yeah, so this beer wouldn't often serve a purpose, but as we get into the episode here, every time you feel like cringing, just take a drink of this beer, because I'm going to be describing all the ways that humans have figured out how to kill each other, and if there's one thing that I'll give humanity, we are clever.
That's the worst beer I've ever had in my entire life.
Yay!
Really?
Solidly the worst.
Oh, by the way, I give it 1 out of 10. Usually 18-year-old me is a fucking idiot, but he's right on the ball there.
Right on the ball. Okay, well, I'm giving it like a 9 out of 10. Like, I am going to buy some of this because I really like it.
Yeah. Amnesiac, Elephant, Twisty, Double IPA Ale.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm going to rate it 1 upstairs frenulum out of 3 downstairs frenula.
Since the Middle Ages, those condemned to death have variously faced being boiled alive, burnt at the stake, or hung, drawn, and quartered. But it was in the late 18th century that the death penalty was applied most widely. London, 1783. Thousands crammed the streets of the capital to watch a public execution carried out in the King's name. This is the height of the Bloody Code, a system of justice and punishment that listed over 200 offences for which a man or woman could be sent to the gallows.
So just to be clear what I'm going to get into this episode, I'm not going to be getting into like philosophical arguments against or for the death penalty. Okay, so to start off with, I'm going to go with general like prehistory methods of execution.
Cool.
So one that's existed for all times ever since people could pick up stones and throw them at each other is stoning. So when this still happens today in Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Qatar, Saudi Arabia.
Qatar.
No, it isn't.
Qatar.
Okay.
I thought it was Qatar.
If anybody from Qatar wants to argue this,
I'm going to look this up. I thought it was Qatar.
Sudan and Yemen. Yeah, and it also is the punishment for many of the crimes in the Old Testament and in the Jewish book of Talmud. And
I have that book.
Yeah. There's several variations of stoning. One part of it is the person is buried up to a certain point. Sometimes it's hips, sometimes it's shoulders, sometimes it's neck. And stones are thrown. And the idea of having a bunch of people throw stones is nobody can be singled out as the person who killed the person. So they can be said to be killed by the community. Sometimes there's variations where they aren't buried at all and they're simply chased through the streets and stones thrown at them. It's mostly punishments for adultery and religious crimes these days in the countries that still use it.
What were you looking up, Leon? Qatar?
Qatar.
I don't believe you.
Qatar. It says right here on the Wikipedia. Qatar.
Wikipedia? Is that what
No, he said Wikiphilia.
Wikiphilia?
There you go.
There's like a billion letters there. You just take one.
Yeah,
country located in Western
How
Asia.
to pronounce
Cutter.
Yes! Qatar.
Okay.
Cutter.
You said Qatar.
So stoning
Yeah, I
is
said
popular in Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, Yemen, and Qatar.
Qatar.
Something that's also been used for 6,000 years in India, South Asia, and Southeast Asia is elephant crushing.
Whoa, cool.
Yeah. Now, there's 3 basic kinds of elephant crushing. If you are very kind and you want the person to die right away, you do head crushing. Of course, the weight of 5 to 10,000 pounds of elephant on a head will kill somebody pretty quickly. If you want to torture the victim instead of kill them, the elephants are told to step on the limbs, and the limbs are often put between 2 different points, and the weight is put on the bone so the bone snaps. A slow way of dying is if the person commands the elephant to step on the person's chest.
Oh, yuck.
All the bones and organs are crushed, and they're very similar to a crushing injury in a building, where basically their bones and all the stuff that's supposed to stay in their organs starts to split into their bloodstream, and they just die of their own fluids mixing together just a little too much, plus excruciating pain and ribs piercing their organs.
Ew.
Wow. Yikes.
Yeah, so there's a big theme about that. A lot of times I'm going to go into, like, if the executioner is kind or not. And there was a lot of discretion left up
Gotta
to...
have sex later.
Oh, yeah. There was a lot of discretion set up to the executioners of the ancient world. Now, in the modern world, there's more of a... With capital punishment, there's more of a goal of, like, bringing someone to death in a humane way, the same way every time. But in the ancient world, you could give somebody a much more painful death if you wanted. These are some primitive executions that were talked about societies that may not have even had names. Now, when I talk about these are prehistory. You know how today we're talking about the Greeks?
Yeah.
So these writings, there's the Greeks talking about ancient people that were as old to them as the Greeks are to us. There's a lot of telephone going on, so who knows how...
Purple monkey dishwasher.
Oh, yeah. This all is. But one of them is Arbori suspendere. So that was an old form of just primitive kind of cave people execution. And it was simply tie somebody at a tree and abandon them there. Make sure they won't get out and they'll just simply starve to death. Another one was banishment, similar to the tree one, except you're taken to a place where you can't really survive. A desert or a desolate jungle or somewhere without much water or something like that, and you were left to die. Another one, vivi mortis, was even more horrifying. Basically, you were allowed to stay in the community, but nobody was allowed to talk to you, nobody was allowed to give you food, nobody was allowed to give you water, nobody was allowed to give you shelter. So you starved to death, and you died from elements in the middle of the community in front of everybody because everybody was shunning you.
Oh.
Oh, yeah. Coitus mortem. So similar to stoning. Now, stoning is specifically them using stones, but coitus mortem is really a phrase to explain any type of group killing. So anytime a bunch of people beat someone to death. And it was a common form of execution in the primitive world. Like, whatever judgment system they had in place, they would judge someone as guilty of death, and they would have the community beat them to death.
Cool.
And of course, because gravity has always been a super simple thing, falling has always been a very popular form of primitive executions. Mm. And of course, ever since humans discovered metal and discovered that the head is really important to the human animal, decapitation was also another one. Now, all those that I listed there were ones that have been used all over the world by almost every society because they're very easy to apply. We envision today the Nordics and the Swedes as nice, peaceful people. But there was a reason that barbarian, the word for barbarian, came from these tribes as they were coming towards Romans.
Is that barbar?
Barbarism.
Yeah, because they thought all the words they were saying were bar, 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 bar. So one of the things that Nordics, ancient Germans, and basically early Vikings did is something called a blood eagle. And if you ever seen, I think, Saw 5, I don't know how many of you actually watched all the Saws.
I like them.
I do.
They all just kind of blended together into one giant murder porn movie.
Yeah, it's just turned my brain off murder porn. Yeah. But what they do is, step one, they skin all the skin and muscles off your back so they can see your spine and they can see your ribs, and that's all pretty. Mm-hmm. Then they go down your spine and they break your ribs right at the spine. Then they fold the ribs back. And they kind of cut a hole in the chest in the front so they peel all the way back.
Yeah.
They do this very carefully so you don't bleed to death. And then once they got the ribs broken and all the way and spread along your back like wings, they take your lungs and they spread it and they stretch them and spread them along the ribs, creating a bloody eagle. And the person slowly dies from blood loss.
So metal.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. The family unit was a very essential part of Germanic peoples. So if you were patricide, if you were to kill a family member, that was considered the highest offense.
Patricide is father, right?
Yeah, patricide, killing the father, or a grandfather killing children, stuff like that. Killing a family member was considered the highest of crimes because you're killing the family unit. So that's what the blood eagle was used for.
What is a blood eagle? Blood eagle is a very special punishment reserved for those who especially angered the gods. The offender gets down on his knees and his back is open with knives. And then, with axes, his ribs are chopped away from his spine. And then his lungs are pulled out of these huge bleeding wounds and laid upon his shoulders so they look like the folded wings of a great eagle. And he must stay like that, suffering until he dies.
So I'm going to focus on different parts of the world and different groups of historical people and the types of punishments they laid out. As much as possible, I tried to also look up what deserved these punishments. What did somebody have to do to get these punishments?
Right.
And of course, through the lens of history, these all look barbaric as fuck to us. But, you know, we're still doing a lot of eye for eye stuff in death penalty states today. But that's a discussion for another episode, of course. Okay, so Rome. So much like the Viking world, Rome was built upon the family unit.
Yeah.
So basically, the most horrendous thing a person could do was kill his own father, or for children to kill their own mother. And that was considered the highest of high crimes. And for the highest of high crimes, they had a specific execution called poena cuelle. So you took an ox skin. Oxes aren't actually a separate species. They're just cattle who have been trained to pull a cart or what's that thing?
Plow.
A plow, yes. And they were usually picked from the biggest and strongest cows out there. So an ox skin is thicker than most. You were sewn into it. So they'd take an ox skin and they would sew you up in it. Oh, this isn't the best part. They sew you in there with a dog, a viper, a monkey, and a rooster.
Wow.
That's extensive.
Okay.
A little bit overboard.
And it was all symbolic. So dogs in that time, they weren't like the cuddly, like master's best friends back then. They were seen as like rats back then. They were seen as pests that just like scrounge. And that's how Roman people seen dogs. And a common Roman insult was to call somebody a dog, because basically you're saying you're lower than dirt. So they put, a garbage animal in with you, a garbage animal with teeth and claws. Mm-hmm. They also put a monkey in there because they considered monkeys to be lesser humans. Some Roman mythology said that monkeys were cursed humans, cursed by the gods of the past. So they put a monkey in there. Snakes were believed to kill their mothers upon being born. Of course, not many. There's a few snake species that do that, but not many. The vipers that live in Rome didn't do that, but they believed that snakes killed their mothers upon being born. And the rooster was considered to be an animal that had no loyalty. So even though you were feeding your rooster in your yard, as soon as the rooster ran out of grain, it would just fly to the other yard. So even though they liked roosters for various things, they considered them animals with no loyalty, so they threw them in. And then, so you're thrown in there, then you're thrown into a river. And you slowly drown to death while being surrounded by 3 panicking animals that are all biting, scratching, and freaking out while drowning to death with you. Yeah.
That sounds awful.
Oh, yeah. That was for people who committed the highest crimes. For the average citizen, the lowly criminal, or someone of low status, they do daminato ad bestia, where basically they would get all the people in the town to come in the Colosseum, and they would hold tournaments where it's basically criminals versus animals. And they would use different animals, so bulls or big cows. They would strap them up and hurt them in some way, just like modern rodeos, to piss them off. Mm-hmm. And then they'd release them, and these bulls would charge and just beat someone up. The difference is there's no rodeo clowns to distract them, and you can't just jump over the gates to get rid of them. Yeah. You die via bull. Also, bears, tigers, and lions. An important thing to know about the Roman kingdom is it was huge. They could drag animals from the corners of the earth and put them in the Colosseum to kill people. The Roman writer Cicero mentions that a lion was able to kill over 200 people who were condemned in one afternoon. So they didn't even need all that many animals, because when I was in the military and I used to teach survival, I always began the year with "you suck as an animal," that speech. Because as animals, we have very low survivability. We suck in cold temperatures, we suck in hot. Like, there's a whole bunch of ways we're really weak at. So, like, one lion being able to kill 200 people was an afternoon of entertainment to the Romans. They also had horses. They would tie people to the necks or to the tails of horses and basically slap them on the ass, and the horse would drag them to death. They would also starve packs of feral dogs and sick them on people like wolves, and they would tear them apart. So that was for average, lowly, or low-status citizens.
Right.
If you were out in the field with a Roman army, you didn't have the access to the Colosseum, or you didn't have, a bunch of animals in an ox sack lying around. So you
ox sack.
Yeah. So you were subject to something called fusterium.
Ooh. So yes, ox sack is the name of my new folk indie band.
Oh, goody.
What the hell was the name of your last folk indie band?
I don't know. I've had so many.
Like Bleeding Frenulum or something like that.
This is the first folk indie band.
Corpse Island. No, Cadaver Island.
Cadaver Island.
Oh, yeah.
And I had a ska band last recorded.
Oh, yeah.
I don't remember.
Yeah. So fusterium was basically beating somebody to death with a cudgel. So a cudgel is a cudgel.
A cudgel is essentially a pillowcase full of brass doorknobs.
Oh, sure.
Fusterium. That sounds like a Skyrim shout.
It does.
Fusterium. Yeah, so basically they would take a really hard piece of wood, like a wood that's very hard, and they would chop it into 2 or 3 foot lengths. And they were like, clubs made of really hard wood.
Cool.
And
That's what she said.
Oh, yeah.
It is what she said.
And basically 5 to 10 soldiers would beat the condemned to death. So it was another one of them. The thing that stands this out is they would pick either close friends of the condemned, or they would pick people who served in the same unit as the condemned to test loyalty. So if you were condemned to death while on a Roman military mission, you would be beat to death by your best friends and the people that you have fought beside for many years.
Leon, I value our friendship, and I would beat you to death if I had to test our loyalty.
That's so sweet.
It's not the loyalty to him, it's the loyalty to the army.
Yeah, fuck you. I would have...
I would beat you to death to test loyalty.
That's fine. I got my own kid to prove my faith to God. No, I wouldn't. I'd say fuck you.
Yeah. The next one has a funny name, but it's one of the more horrible ones, Tunica molesta.
Molesta.
Yeah.
Tunica. Is that when you put your dick in a can of tuna?
No. Although very close. No, not really. This was
not close at all.
this was saved for heretics, and the favorite brand of heretics that Romans loved to put to death were Christians. And Tunica molesta was basically taking...
No, that's definitely coming into a can of tuna.
Definitely. Okay, I guess I'll put a poll up on Twitter. You can go A, B, whether you want it to be Leon's version or mine. But basically...
Why not both?
Maybe. Romans had a way to create naphtha. So naphtha is the same thing you put in Coleman lanterns and stoves. And they did this by distilling...
That's naphtha.
Naphtha.
Not naphtha.
Naphtha.
That's a free trade agreement.
I was like, isn't that the North American
died.
free trade?
The people don't come for my pronunciations. They'd be gone already. Yeah, but basically...
Or Leon's pronunciation of
It's a controversy.
No, it's controversy.
Controversy. Yeah. So basically,
Fuck you.
the Romans figured out how to make it by distilling coal tar and peat together. And basically, they would take this burlap shirt, they would cover it in this naphtha.
Naphtha?
It's short for naphthalene.
Naphthalene. There we go.
Nambla.
They would give them a shirt that's just soaked in the stuff and set them on fire. If they were a noble, they'd hold a Colosseum event and let people just watch them burn to death in the middle of a Colosseum, and that'd be like a sideshow event in between the animal stuff.
Like
or
you do.
If they were just a commoner, they would just let them walk down a street and have them be an example to the other commoners. It usually took them about 5 to 10 minutes to die, so 5 to 10 minutes of screaming pain. Another Roman favorite was crucifixion.
Yeah.
We know that in Rome, they crucified once 6,000 people as part of a victory celebration on one of the main roads leading out of Rome. But this gives you an idea of how widespread this was and why perhaps hundreds of thousands of people were crucified over a period of 800 years. I have a feeling when we see Christian art, it looks like Jesus is up there in the air, probably about 10 or 12 feet. I don't think that really would have been the situation. I think it would have been closer to the ground. One of the reasons I think that this is true is that we know that many individuals were left on the cross. And we know that, for example, dogs, hyenas, jackals, other predators were the ones that just simply took the body apart. So if it would have been high up in the air, it would have been very, very difficult. And what would have happened was that the individual, after the trial, after being beaten, would have had to carry the cross bar. He then would have been nailed to the cross or tied to the cross, and then he would have been lifted up, and he would have been in this manner here. Now, this is a Roman invention. This is called a sedicule. And one of the problems with being on the cross is exhaling. You can inhale, but it's very difficult to exhale. So what happens, the Romans would have put this seat up here. You can use your arms and your legs to pull yourself up and sit there, but you can't sit there very long. You can sit there for maybe a few seconds, and what happens, you slip down again. Once you slip down again, the whole process starts all over again. The pain, the agony, it just becomes prolonged. If you take an individual, a young man, if you take a young man, you put his hands, either tie them or nail them above his head so the body is hanging. If his legs are free, he can pull himself up for maximum an hour. If his feet are nailed or if his feet are somehow tied and he can't, he's dead within 4 to 10 minutes. It's that quick.
So crucifixion was saved for pirates, enemies of the state, people who created treason, or slaves. It was considered a super shameful way to die, so they saved it for people who were the lowest dregs of society, according to the Romans. They were also famous for mass crucifixion. So in 70 CE, the destruction of Jerusalem, Emperor Crassus crucified 6,000 captured insurgents.
Look on the bright side of life.
There we go. Okay, so there's two different versions, and it depends on how much wood you want to waste. If you're hanging 6,000 people, you go with the first one. And the first one is basically you take a straight up piece of wood and you just tie their hands above their head and you nail their palms to it. And basically you make it high enough so that all or most of their weight is hanging off their hands.
And the nail through their hand.
Yeah. Now it seems easy, like if you put your hands just like that, but imagine all the weight hanging from your hands. Like even try and press your hands above your head and have your like biceps touch your ears and try and take a deep breath in. Basically, you get about half the amount of oxygen you need for days on end.
Yeah, well, and then like your shoulders would dislocate.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, we all have our feet firmly on the ground.
Yeah.
In this
I have my butt
crucifixion,
firmly in a chair.
Or butt for we all have like a lower like we're all supported, whereas this crucifixion you're not supported.
Yeah.
So that's where your weight is actually.
Yep. I was talking before about how merciful the executioner is. So basically, the executioners in Roman times, there was a long history of them hating crucifixions because they took so fucking long.
Right.
People usually took 1 to 3 days to die because you're getting about half the oxygen you need for that amount of time. So you just slowly die of oxygen deprivation. So often, to speed things up, because, you know, the executioners want to get home early too, they would start breaking your leg bones. Because you could try and press your feet against the back and like maybe take like...
A wiggle up.
Yeah, maybe a wiggle up, or maybe you take like 20% of your weight off and all that. They just start breaking ankles and legs to stop you from doing that. If you keep on doing it, they start just stabbing you with spears and making you bleed and just basically... And sometimes they would tie weights to your legs so that the weight hanging from your arms is more and more. These mass executions were often a huge public event where they'd take like a bunch of the Roman population on the hill to observe them. So it was a big like example against the people kind of event. Oh, also, something I put in here, it wasn't very common because usually the Roman military were very efficient when they took people out. But when they caught somebody who was a high general or somebody high up in the military that really fucked up, they gave them a field execution that's called a tree bisection.
Ooh.
So you take two young, maybe 30-foot tall, like tough trees, and you get two work animals to pull them down. You tie them to the ground. You then attach somebody's, like a rope around somebody's hips and attach it to one tree, and a rope around somebody's armpits and attach it to the other. And at the same time, you get two soldiers, 1, 2, 3 cut. The trees spring back into place and the person rips in half.
Oh.
Yeah. And that was used on high generals in the Roman military.
Wow.
To be fair, that sounds a lot quicker than most of the shit you're saying.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now we're going to go over to China. Now, an important thing to know about Chinese execution is basically the more in one piece they leave your body, the more respect they have for you.
Okay.
Because they believe to some degree you use your body's form after death. So if they wrecked more of your body, it was considered a great insult because you're going to have a fucked up body after death.
Okay.
So that's an important thing to remember. So for the highest people, so this is for patricide and high treason.
The real bad one.
The real bad ones where they don't want them to have a usable body. They have something called Ling Chi, also known as slow slicing or death by 1,000 cuts.
Oh, yeah.
It was used from 900 CE all the way up to 1905.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. Yeah, into this century. Basically, they would just tie you to a chair.
The last century?
Yeah.
1905?
Yeah, last century.
There you go.
They tied you to a chair or they tied you to a pole, so standing up or sitting. They would start at your fingers. They would take slow slices and they would start to cut off more and more meat. Basically, they had Chinese doctors and people who consider themselves experts in anatomy do these things because it was considered quite a challenge to see how many cuts you could go. Now, the name Death by 1,000 Cuts is a bit of a misnomer. Because it happened so late, it kept on happening into 1905, they actually have photographic records of it happening. And they can time with these photographic records that these things lasted about 20 to 50 minutes and about 100 to 200 cuts before the person would bleed to death.
Wow.
And basically, they would try and The goal would be to make you into a torso. They would try and cut off all the meat off your arms. And they would take time to make sure to just trunicate the bleeding so you would survive, and they keep on cutting.
Yuck.
Yeah. Apparently, there's some Ying Dynasty writings that said that somebody made it to 3,600 cuts, but one thing you'll find common around all of history is all historians love to brag about their own people. They would often cauterize wounds afterwards to make sure it is continued and continued. The next one down, so if you're in a many part, so if you're lower, if you committed something slightly less, you would be subject to Chile.
Argentina.
Chile?
Yeah.
My grandmother's Chile would also render you dead.
Oh, yeah?
That is true.
It burns you twice out here. Yeah. So basically, it's the thing you've seen in a bunch of old movies. They have 5 ropes attached to 5 chariots.
Yeah.
1 rope is tied around each limb and 1 around the head, and each chariot has 2 horses. I don't know, a horse has 5.6 horsepower, so you guys can do the math on that. But anyways, they get all the horses to run apart, and limbs and head are all torn apart. Yep. So that one, instead of being separated into several...
was awesome.
Oh, yeah. Instead of being separated into several thousand parts, you're just separated into 5 parts. Yeah, no big deal. Okay, the next one up is Yao Zan, which is called the waist chop.
Oh boy!
So this was saved for noble criminals because you're only separated into 2 parts. No big deal.
That's okay.
So if you look at pictures of this, of the waist chop, it looks like somebody made a giant paper cutter, like person size, where a person could fit under the blade, and they would have them lay face down, spine first, and they would just chop them in half with a large blade.
Waist chopper.
Yeah.
I'm looking at pants.
If you look China waist chop, that might...
China. Yeah. Waist chopper China.
This is again done up into like early 1900s modern times. And it said that people lived for 30 to 60 seconds after this. And there's photographic evidence of education minister of the time being executed for corruption, writing the Chinese symbol for horrible/miserable 6.5 times. He didn't quite write it a 7th time before he died.
How do you spell that in... Because I'm just finding like really cute Korean clothes when I look up waist
Y-A-O.
Oh, there it is. Oh, cool. It's like one of those like a... thing.
Yeah, it's like a paper cutter.
Yeah.
And it wasn't always one chop. Like, there was some discretion. Like, there was this satirical poet named Gao Chi, who really pissed off this one emperor with his satirical political poems, and he was subject to 8 chops instead of 1.
Oh.
So he was separated into 9 pieces. The next one is Sha, which is just beheading. So it's just a large blade or a knife. That's for common criminals. And the last one, if you were a high noble or you could pay somebody off, you just suffocation. So somebody would soak a rag in some impermeable liquid and hold it over your mouth until dead.
Oh.
Yeah, easy.
Easy peasy.
Yeah.
Does this smell like chloroform to you?
Next one up is Persia.
Ooh, yeah.
They have some fucked up ones.
Yeah.
Sheken. Sheken was being hanged upside down. So they put 2 posts in the ground. They hung you upside down by your ankles so that one leg would be on one post and one leg would be on the other. They would then take a big machete and they would start hacking at you, starting at the crotch.
Oh.
According to the stuff I read, they consider a good execution to be 3 to 5 blows. So if you could get all the way through somebody in 3 to 5 blows from like taint to head, that was considered a good execution.
Oh boy.
That was
from stem to stern.
Oh yeah. So that was considered for treason against Persia. Another one is called ash suffocation.
Oh.
So they would fill a 30-foot tower up with ash, like a wood ash from burning wood. They collected after a while. They'd drop somebody in there, and it would often be like waist deep to them.
Yeah.
What they do then is they'd start turning these cranks at the top and the bottom of the mill, and it would stir up the ash.
Oh, no.
And they would die from suffocation within 10 to 15 minutes. They wouldn't be able to get any real air among the ash.
Yeah, that would be a bad one.
And once it hits the mucus parts of your mouth, it just turns into a sludge that plugs up your throat, and you just suffocate to death.
That would be a real ashhole way to go.
Yeah, but that was saved for dignitaries and nobles because it gave you a sort of good-looking body to bury. Hey, that's nice.
Oh, that's like at the top of my list about shitty ways to die, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, I'd hate that.
Wait till we get to the end of this.
Okay.
This is called immurement. Immurement. Future Ood, look up how to pronounce that. Hey, past dude, it was immurement. You were kind of close. I'll figure it out. So this is for robbers, thieves, and trespassers.
Oh.
So if you were to walk into the nearest desert next to most Persian city-states, there would be a bunch of these towers, 10 feet wide by about 10 feet tall, and they're a bunch of prisons. Basically what they would do is if you were caught being a thief or caught being a trespasser on noble lands, and also you would see a bunch of these towers half-built in these deserts. So they would simply just put you in the tower, and brick by brick, they would just seal you the rest of the way up.
They did that on an episode of Thomas the Train.
The tank engine?
Yeah, they sealed up, I think it was James or Henry? I forget who, but they sealed him inside a tunnel because he didn't want to get his paint wet.
Holy shit.
Yeah, Sir Topham Hatt did that. He was a dick.
Holy.
The Reverend Audrey was a dark, dark man.
Man, the train conductor did not fuck around.
No, you need to be... You have to be always like a very useful engine.
I sentenced this intelligent train to death.
Yep.
Do they die by starvation?
Well, they let him out eventually, but he just like left him in there for like a year, I think.
Jesus. Oh, and
I think that's what it is. I don't remember.
By the way,
I should do an episode on dark children's
shit. That is dark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Immerment, but it's been Immerment, like, and all this stuff that we're using here, like, you'll find that as soon as civilization began trading and like communicating with the beside one, they often stole each other's execution methods. You'll see bleeding all over the fucking place. Yeah.
But everywhere.
The most horrifying Persian one I heard of is Scaphism. Now, it has kind of like an academic sounding name, but it's fucking horrifying. Okay, so you're placed between two canoes. So you have your arms basically strapped to your sides and tied to the side of the boats, and you have the same thing with your feet. And you have a canoe above you and a canoe below you.
Okay.
And your head is sticking out the top. So what's sticking out of the canoe is your arms and your feet and your head. And you have a canoe over top of you and a canoe underneath you.
Oh.
Now you're force-fed milk and honey for days on end.
Oh, boy.
To the point where you shit yourself and vomit all over yourself. At that point, they spread more milk and honey all over your body. Now, you're not able to move. You're not able to spread it off. They then simply push you into a swamp. And you're tied up. You're covered in your own fecal matter, your own vomit, honey and milk. And bugs and vermin begin coming and just begin eating you alive.
That's where I knew that word from. It's like a weird grind band, Scaphism.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And that was the most
I've listened to that.
That was the most popular way to do it. But sometimes they would just tie people to posts and tie up their hands and legs so they wouldn't be able to move, and they give them the same treatment. They would just overfeed them and just let the animals pick at them.
Oh, Murder with Friends did an episode on them.
Oh, there we go.
Shout out to Murder with Friends.
There we go. And another podcast?
There could be a YouTube thing.
Could be.
It's pretty fun.
Okay, so that's for Persia. So now we're going to cover pirate crimes or pirate executions.
Yeah, pirates.
Now, really, this goes over like sea executions because it deals with like professional navies and all that, but pirate execution sounds cooler, so we're going to go with that.
It totally sounds cooler.
Oh, yeah. So the first one is called ship tearing, and it's going to look familiar to something you saw where was the tearing? Oh, in China.
Yeah.
So basically, it was called ship quartering, but I thought that was kind of misleading because there was a different amount of ships all the time. So you have to have one or more ships.
Yeah.
You take the condemned. You also have you often have multiple condemned people at a time, and you take the thickest rope you can, and you tie it around various parts of these people. And of course, you tie the rope that's connected to the other ships around various other parts. Then you set sail and go in different directions. There might be a few thousand feet of line, so they don't know really when the slack is going to tighten and the limb is going to be ripped off.
Oh my God.
And basically, whoever has the biggest chunk, whoever ends up with the torso and head, they either die from the shock and blood loss or they drown from being dragged behind the ship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah, so that's ship tearing. And that was a popular thing amongst professional British and Spanish Navy. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's not even pirates, that's professional Navy.
It wouldn't cost anything.
Oh, no. Yeah, and you'd be able to use those ropes again?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Key hauling. Now, what you got to know about key hauling is that on the bottom of wooden boats, they become their own little ecosystem over time.
Yeah.
They build certain types of coral, take root in the wood. Barnacles take root, mussels take root, clams, bacteria, and of course, you have parasites that live amongst them, and you have fish that live amongst them, and it turns into a nice little eco-habitat. But the thing about clams and mussels and barnacles is one of their natural defenses, since they can't move, is being sharp as fuck.
Yeah.
So if something brushes against them, they'll be damaged. So pirates took advantage of this. They either threw a rope over the sides of the ship and then brought it out the other side to go all the way around the belly of the ship, or they went from the front of the ship to the back, from bow to stern. And what they would do is they would chain you up to one section of the rope and they would drag you along the bottom.
Oh, yeah.
Now, you die either way. It's a 2 to 8 minute trip. If they drag you fast, you're not going to drown, because if you can hold your breath for 2 minutes, you'll be fine. But you'll be scraped against the stuff on the bottom of the boat enough that you'll be lacerated to death and you'll bleed to death.
And you'll be full of disgusting grossness.
Oh, yeah. And even if you don't die, like all the bacteria and shit that's under there, like pirate times, you're not going to have antibiotic.
Nope.
And if they took you nice and slow enough that you floated below those sharp things, you would just drown to death.
Yep.
So you die either way. Gibbeting. Now, gibbeting was used, of course, all throughout history, but it became famous in the Caribbean. So, if you're looking for a real Pirates of the Caribbean type execution, this is it. Basically, they were cages that were hung above cliffs or at ports, and basically they would have the condemned in those cages.
Yeah.
And they would just be hung in an area to starve to death and become a skeleton. Just before everybody. In populated areas, they were starved in public, and some scholars say that it was more cruel to let them starve in public, because once in a while somebody would give them mercy and give them a little food and a little water, but really it would just prolong their suffering even longer. And often, because the people that punish them and put them in there are watching, if they get a good treatment, they'll just feel free to give them a little hard time later. Maybe take a finger or take a thumb or whoever.
Ugh.
Yeah. But this was all over again. So it was very popular in the Caribbean. Actually, something where it was really popular was in Quebec.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In 1700s Quebec, when it was still known as New France,
right.
They did gibleting all the time as a public execution. So if you look into the history of Quebec, you'll find all kinds of criminals that were put to death by being starved to death in cages hanging above city streets.
Oh.
Yeah. And of course, Germany and England. Yeah. Marooning was another one. So basically, you find an uninhabitable area. Often, if you're just a lowly like shipmate, or if you're guilty of throwing a mutiny or something, you're not the captain. They'll just find a sandbar at low tide, so that they know in a few hours it'll turn into high tide and you'll drown to death. If you're a captain or somebody that deserves a dignified death, what they'll do is they'll give you a skin of water, which is about 2 liters of water. They'll give you a day's worth of food, often dried meats and stuff, and a pistol with 1 bullet. And they'll leave you on an island with no trees and all that. So basically, you can choose whether you want to starve to death or whether you want to take the gun way out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they give you a dignified death because you can choose to end it painlessly if you want to. Usually, somebody who's marooned can last 5 to 10 days.
Wow.
Yeah. Of course, if they're left on an uninhabited island with nothing, they would last like 5 to 6 days without water. But if they're given that skin of water and that bit of food and they were disciplined, they would last 5 to 10 days. One that surprised me is walking the plank. Now, there's very little evidence of it actually being done on a regular basis. Really, the only evidence of walking the plank is when there was special occasions, like when they invaded.
Happy birthday!
Oh, who knows? Of course. But like they would use it for like captured kings and like generals of armies and stuff, and and sometimes they would just use it for people they really wanted to fuck with. And again, they would use the mercy of the executioner. So they would leave you unbounded if they disliked you. So they would leave you with your hands unbounded, and basically because you would spend days treading water and basically just dying from exhaustion. It's a much slower death. So if they liked you, they would bind your arms. So you would drown and sink and die quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Greece, ancient Greece. So for traders, they chose the brazen bull.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So
I was waiting for that one.
Oh, yeah. So the brazen bull is about the size of an actual bull. It's about 5 foot tall. It has a hollow body and neck, and it's made of solid bronze. There's one door in and out held together with metal pieces, and if you were to look inside, maybe with a flashlight, you would see a series of pipes going up from the neck into the head. Now, what happened is somebody was placed inside of this solid bronze bull, and it was locked up, and a fire was set beneath it. And this whole bull would get red hot. You know when you put a piece of chicken against an iron skillet and it just begins to sizzle and like the skin begins to burn on the side of the skillet? That becomes all the thing you're in. you live in a thing that its walls, roof, and floor becomes burning hot. And the reason for the pipes in the neck is because the screaming of the people inside through the piping, because the Greeks were very good about building instruments. They could actually make it sound like a bull bellowing with a person's screams. It was often used at feasts. Usually, sometimes to entertain people who were visiting the kingdom and all that, they would throw some slaves and some condemned into the brazen bull during a feast, because you didn't need to see the horror, and people had something to take home afterwards, because in that environment where it's well sealed and it's a low oxygen environment with high heat, their bones turned into these black jewels that could be handed out as parts to be made into jewelry at the end of the feast.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah.
Party favors.
I need to get these.
Sounds efficient.
Another popular one in Greece is making somebody eat hemlock. So I guess their day lethal injection, except much more eventful. So hemlock begins with trembling, then a loss of speech, then you get muscle weakness, you get unconsciousness, the muscle tissue itself begins to degrade and rot. Your lungs cease working, and basically you succumb to death after your lungs quit working. People usually last about 30 to 60 minutes after eating hemlock. Another one was exile. So exile was equivalent to the death penalty in Greece, because nobody you knew was allowed to talk to you again, and people would often die on the outskirts of town with thieves and all that. This was used for slaves and commoners. Another one was the iron crucifixion. So basically you had this chair and this iron bar was placed around your neck, and it was attached to a little gear system. And they would keep on twisting it, and it would get tighter and tighter around your neck until you suffocated to death. And that's called the iron crucifixion.
That's cool.
Oh, yeah.
I really need to find where I can buy this bone jewelry.
Oh, I don't know if you can buy it. I don't know if they've done. I don't know if they've done like brazen bullshit in the last 1800 years.
I severely doubt it is in production.
If anyone has it, please send it to me.
Yeah. If you can break in any museums without anybody finding out. I'm not saying do it, but it'd be cool. I don't know.
Jewelry made from bones?
We need a lawyer, don't we?
Yeah, you fucking do.
Yep. So we're going to go into medieval times. So this is in Europe and in Britain and France and Spain and those areas. The first one I'm going to talk about, for high treason men, you were hanged, drawn, and quartered. So this is hanging from the neck until near death. So basically they would put a noose around your neck, and instead of dropping you to break your neck, they would just lift the rope up and you would slowly suffocate. And they basically bring you to the edge of consciousness over and over again until you're really woozy and you had a little bit of brain damage. Then your genitals were removed. That is penis and testicles. Then your guts were removed, sliced down the middle, and all your intestines and organs were pulled out. You were then beheaded, chopped into 4 pieces, and often all the pieces of you were put into a metal cage and put on display somewhere to rot before the citizens.
Gross.
So that was for high treason men.
Is the point of that religious of some sort? Like you're not going into the afterlife with your body? Is that the reason why? I don't know.
I'm not sure. I think it was just brutal, and I think a lot of the cultures back then, they were very uptight about nudity and violence in public and stuff like that. And I think doing something this shocking and this brutal and this bloody, and people were naked when it was happening and all that, I think that was just it was such a contrast to regular society. I think that's what it was.
Shaming them as well as killing them.
Yeah. But of course, women couldn't be put up with the same treatment, because even though you're still killing them, it was considered undignified to kill a woman with hanging, drawing, and quartering them. Mm-hmm. So they were subjected to burning at the stake. Burning at the stake, I'm sure in movies you see them lighting a fire and then all of a sudden it foofs up like that. And that's actually closer to reality than you might think, because the correct way, the most popular way to do burning at the stake is to have the stake actually drive into the ground and have a little tub built around it. And that tub would be filled often ankle to knee deep with pitch and tar.
Oh, yeah.
And then there would be a bunch of wood built up around that. So basically they would light the wood on fire, and all that flame has to do is get to the center of the pitch and the tar, and it gets really hot really quick. Depending on the mercy of the executioner, the neck would be slit before, so you wouldn't have to suffer through the burning. Otherwise it'd be, a 5 to 10 minute ride of writhing and burning. Just pain. if you did murder via poisoning, specifically, there was a specific punishment in medieval times. That's boiling to death.
Oh.
So they use oil, water, tar, or fallow. Fallow was like animal fat. So like imagine boiling to death in bacon fat. They used a hook and pulley system, depending on how long they wanted it to take and how quickly they wanted you to die, to dip you in over and over again. If they wanted you to die quickly, they would just plunge you in and you die within a few minutes. But they could make it go on a long, long time, especially since burns from boiling stuff isn't an open wound, so you're not going to die from blood loss.
Yeah.
Yes, they can, and they either did it through an open, large cauldron. So if they wanted to make it quick, they'd do it through a cauldron, so they can dip you up and down. But if they wanted to make it quick, they would put you inside of a sealed kettle, and you'd basically just be pressure cooked to death.
Oh,
yeah. Something that became so popular during medieval times, and somebody was named after it, impalement.
Impaling is a spectacular form of execution, designed to put the fear of God into those watching. And the good thing is it doesn't take much in the way of equipment or training. Just take a great big wooden stake and skewer your intending victim on it like a kebab, either through the chest or, vertically, through the bum. In most cases, the executioner sliced open the victim's anus with a blade and hammered the greased stake home with a mallet, then set it up vertically. The victim's weight would then drag him down the stake until it ran into something solid. If the executioner aimed well, it might even come out through the chest, neck, or mouth. The victims took several hours or even days to die. Their groans and screams really hammered home the message that you really didn't want to die this way. The nec plus ultra was to use a stake that wasn't too sharp so that it would push past the organs without spearing them, prolonging the agony. Impaling was a common form of torture used everywhere from India to Turkey and Russia. The French army used it to execute Suleiman el-Alabi for assassinating General Kleber in Egypt. He took over 4 hours to die.
Impalement was all over Asia, Europe, Rome, and Central America. There's 3 basic types: longitudinal, which is butt to mouth. Basically, they would cut apart your genitals and cut apart your crotch, and they would make a hole for the pole to go in. And a good longitudinal impalement was if they could make it come out of your mouth. That was the goal. That was considered a pretty impalement. But because these poles were like holding the body weight up, a lot of the blood vessels were pressed nice and tight against that pole, so it would prevent them bleeding to death for days. So people that were impaled often died from exposure before blood loss. So it was often days rotting up there. Of course, the other types are horizontal through the torso, and that's from any angle. They can go belly button to spine, or they can go across the belly, and cross-longitudinal, and that's from like hip to shoulder or any way like that across the body. And again, it would take anywhere from 3 hours.
Dick to throat.
Oh, good. Yikes. Yeah. Christ. Oh, man, I have to peel it like a banana. That'd be horrible. Okay. Yeah, so because it took so much discretion upon the executioner of like what major arteries he hits and like how good a job he does, it took anywhere from 3 hours to 5 days to die. And it was always a flip of the coin. You never knew how long somebody was going to take once you impaled them.
Yuck.
Yeah. Next up is the guillotine.
Guillotine.
Guillotine. Basically, a heavy, sharp blade drops a minimum of 5 feet. And I guess 5 feet is the minimum because that's how high it needs to be to have the momentum to cut through a neck.
9.8 meters per second squared.
Yeah, that sounds right.
No, that is right.
No,
that's exactly right.
That's gravity.
Yeah.
9.8 meters per second squared. Gravity acceleration.
Gravity acceleration, yeah.
Now, guillotines were used way later than most people assume. The last guillotine execution in France happened in September 1977.
Wow.
This was after the release of the first Star Wars movie. Much like Game of Thrones, severed heads were often displayed. Again, medieval times are all about like showing the peasants, showing the serfs what was up, and like teaching them a lesson by putting the condemned on display. So they would display the heads until they rotted into skeletons. Another horrible one from medieval times was sawing. So it was very similar to the Persian method of death, where you were hung up by your ankles and chopped down the middle, except they would use a blunt like tree saw, and they would saw back and forth.
Just serrated and just like... So just like serrated and gooshing everywhere.
Well, yeah, and it was designed to be slower than the machete because the machete you would get through in like 5 to 6 strokes, so let's say 30 seconds. But
that's what she said.
Oh boy. Yeah. But for these long tree saws, they would slowly slice through, and I don't know if it's just like historians bullshitting or not, but they considered a good song execution for the person to still be conscious by the time they got to the head.
Whoa.
Yeah, and just the blood always rushing to the head would have enough blood pressure to keep them somewhat conscious.
Right.
Who knows if they're aware? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another Roman one, Matazello. Yeah, which is
sounds like delicious cheese.
Oh yes, and it's appropriate because it's a palpable. So basically, it's a punishment that the Pope dealt out and had his priests and cardinals delve out in Rome. And basically, it was just an executioner with a heavy hammer or mallet, and often they were just a standout member of the church. And that's because you didn't need much training to do this execution. It was very simple. And all you did was the priest or the cardinal said a final prayer over you, and often this is for religious crimes. So if you read the Bible, anything Leviticus leading to death, any shit like that, if the Pope sentenced you to death...
Watch out for shellfish and wearing 2 different fabrics. Yeah. Fucking crazy ass shit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and basically, the priest would say a final prayer over you, and they would get this representative, so this executioner for a day, to come up, and they would just smack you over the head with a super heavy hammer. And often this wouldn't be enough to kill you, because we have fucking hard heads. Yeah. So usually they would have an assistant to the priest quickly cut the neck of the person. So even if you weren't dead, you would bleed out quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some historians said this is the worst execution he has ever witnessed and is the most brutal, but it seems pretty quick and easy to me.
Compared to all these other ones.
Yeah. Another one used in the 18th and 19th century was breaking the wheel. We have we have a little bit left.
Catherine, it's in a Catherine wheel?
Yeah, exactly, a Catherine wheel. So basically, it was like a big wagon wheel. So like a big outside wooden wheel, and you have a lot of spokes, 5 to 8 spokes, just like the Old West, exactly what you're picturing. Mm-hmm. So basically, your limbs would be lashed to the edges of this wheel. Now, the thing is, when you have your limbs dangling between these spokes, but they're supported in the middle by being tied to the middle of the wheel, and they're supported on the outside by being tied to the outside. If somebody were to bludgeon you with bludgeoning weapons, your limbs would break. They would just be levered in that way. It'd be like putting a stick between 2 rocks and then stepping on the stick. That's how it broke. Yeah. And the horrible thing is, it was called braiding the wheel sometimes, because say they broke your forearm in the middle. What they would do is they then take your forearm and they'd wrap it around the wagon wheel and they'd relash it. And they basically thread your body throughout the wagon wheel.
And just keep breaking you in different ways.
Yeah. And like it was another coin toss. Like, will you die from shock? Will you die from blood loss? Or is the executioner good enough to keep you alive and suffering? This execution could take anywhere from a few hours to 3 days, depending on the mercy of the executioner. And of course, for all of these, there was always a tradition that the kind executioner would slit the throat before. Yeah. And the punishment on the body would be enough anyways. It'd be enough to appease the roar of the crowd and all that. Because humanity once enjoyed going to these things like movies. And that's got to be an episode in on itself.
Yeah.
Christ. So this is just some miscellaneous ones.
Kitten. Oh, no.
Oh, really?
Get out, Lilu.
She has a hard life.
Yeah, really hard.
Yeah. When she was whining for wet food, guess who gave her wet food? That was me.
Yeah, you're the weakest link.
I'm a big sucker. So this is just some miscellaneous ones. So these are ones that are either from modern times or didn't fit with any of the other regions, but were cool. Not sure cool. Interesting enough to mention anyways. One is blowing from the gun. And this is basically found from any society with access to cannons. You may be able to guess what it is. Basically, it was strapping someone to the front of the cannon and then firing them. It wasn't often used. Mostly firing lines were rather used, but when they wanted to make a big deal of it, they would do it this way. The reason it wasn't used often is because it was very unpredictable, and there's reports of people being injured by like flying pieces of bone coming from the explosion. The Mongolian armies actually got access to Chinese cannons, and something they did with slaves was put them inside of the cannon and then fire it.
Oh, yeah.
So you not only get pelted with cannon fodder, you get pelted with pieces of often your own army men.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Mongols are terrifying. Yeah. Something done in South Africa, India, and Brazil is something called necklacing.
Oh, yeah.
So they put a rubber tire around somebody's chest and head, and they strap it down tight enough, either with rope or burlap, to make it so they can't take it off. They make it a nice small tire. They then fill the inside of the tire and douse the person with gasoline, and they set them on fire. Basically, by the time the gasoline is done burning up, the rubber of the tire has ignited, and it keeps that fire going for a long, long time. It can take someone dying from this 10 to 20 minutes to die. Mm-hmm. And in these communities, they often light them up at the courthouse and let them just walk throughout the streets and be an example to everyone. Next up is hanging. Hanging is found all over the world. There's 4 different types of hanging. Suspension is basically where they tie the rope around your neck and then they just raise the rope slowly. And you die from the throat being constricted and the blood loss to the head, but you die slowly. It takes 10 to 20 minutes to die. And there's also lots of convulsions and pain and you going in and out of consciousness, and it's the least complicated. All you need to do is to tie a rope around somebody's neck and lift up. The next one is the short drop. So this is done in societies where they had something to elevate, but they might not have had like a whole gallows. So they would tie the noose to a tree or some type of higher up thing, and they would put the condemned on the back of a horse or on the back of a cart, or sometimes in modern societies they put them in the bed of a truck, and then they drive away, and eventually their little short drop fell away and they'd fall short ways. And if it wasn't long enough to break their neck, who cares? We're going to let them hang there and die anyways. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The next one is the standard 4 to 6 foot drop. So this is the one that was used forever and ever. And once France and Britain got a hold of the gallows design and all that, they built it pretty much standard to this for many, many years. And it was just a standard, probably 6 foot drop. And they found for most people in most situations, a 6 foot drop was tall enough to break the neck but not pop off the head. And it's again one of those weird superstition things where it was dignified to break the neck, but if you popped off the head, too far. That's not a good execution.
That's icky.
Yeah. Yeah, they have weird standards. Now, there's something else called the long drop system. So this was put in like the 1800s, like when industrialization and like science and physics really started to take hold. And basically they had this adjustable system of weights and rope, and they would measure how tall you are and how much you weigh, and you would be able to calculate exactly how much length of rope you would need to break someone's neck but not pop their head off. So that was used in like the latter years of hanging when they could calculate shit out. Yeah. Now, related to hanging, used in the States for a few years, but they quit because it was too expensive, was something called the upright jerker. So a regular hanging thing, gallows. Yeah. You were either pushed off or a trapdoor fell and you fell down. With the upright jerker, you started on the ground, and with a series of weights and gears, you were suddenly pulled off the ground.
Oh.
Like kind of like, you know those Roman trees we talked about a while back where they snap? Kind of like that.
Okay.
So you would start out standing, the upright jerker would pull upwards and it would break your neck because you were just, the rope around your neck was just pulled up at such a high speed that it just breaks your bones. Mm-hmm. But of course, it had working automatic parts. It was expensive to build. So it didn't really catch on, because why would you buy this expensive thing if hanging just with a regular wooden gallows worked just as well?
Yeah.
So it didn't really catch on.
It's hard for many of us to imagine someone being hanged in public. But in 1936, that was a legal form of execution, and thousands from all across the country came to Owensboro to witness it firsthand. Walking down this street in downtown Owensboro today, you'd see nothing but growth. New hotels, a new convention center, and the family-friendly Smothers Park. But you'd never know that once you reach this stop sign at the corner of Elizabeth Street and Veterans Boulevard, that you were standing in the spot that put Owensboro on the front page of every major newspaper in every major city.
He was 22 years old. He was from somewhere in Virginia.
Keith Lawrence, a veteran reporter for the Owensboro Messenger-Enquirer, has researched and many times written about the hanging of Rainey Bethea, a young man accused of raping and murdering an elderly woman.
He confessed to it 2 or 3 times.
Bethea was only convicted, though, of the rape charge and sentenced to death by hanging. The execution immediately drew national headlines because the sheriff of Davis County at the time was a woman.
I mean, there was thousands of people that you could see throughout this area.
David Wolf has written a book in part about the hanging. He also leads historical tours of downtown Owensboro and is often asked about the events of that day.
I figured they would hate the story, and they actually don't. They want to hear it.
When Bethia was walked to the gallows around 5:30 that morning, he was surrounded by a crowd of up to 20,000 people. Some say it was a carnival-like atmosphere with hot dogs and drinks being sold. Lawrence recalls once interviewing a downtown Owensboro restaurant owner who decided to join the crowd that morning.
Said he walked over there. He was running his restaurant all night because big crowd. And he was selling a lot of hamburgers. He walked over there to see it, and he said, I was expecting to see this big old strapping guy. And this guy looked like a little kid. He said, I just couldn't stay. And he said, I hung that man in my dreams for months.
Bethia was buried at Elmwood Cemetery in Owensboro in an unmarked grave.
Shootings in the gun line. So there is two types of execution by shooting. There's one by the firing line, and there's all different types. Sometimes everybody in the fire line has a bullet. Sometimes all but one have blanks. So one person has the true bullet, everybody else has blanks. How it was usually done in America is all guns were loaded except for one had a blank. And the guns were distributed randomly. So you'd never know. Maybe you were the one with the blank and maybe you were blameless. And it was to give like people doing firing line executions, I guess a moral foothold to keep hold of. Like maybe I'm not the guy that killed him and all that. The other type, and of course, these type of executions were found in any nation with access to guns because it's a very fast and efficient way. And of course, the other one is called execution style, where you just take a pistol to the back of someone's head, they bend down in front of you, and you try and fire it like through their brainstem and try and kill them that way.
Boondock Saints.
Oh yes, yeah. If you look up execution style shooting, like you'll see.
Don't do it.
Yeah, I mean, don't. But if you were, yeah. Flaying. So this is found throughout Asia, Europe, Central America, Ireland, Greece, Roman, everywhere. And I guess you die from blood loss and shock. And flaying is when you remove the skin on the body.
Yeah.
And usually the victim never usually survived full skinning because there was too much shock and blood loss. Next one is buried alive. So this is found in Rome, Denmark, Germany, and the Netherlands. So you either sealed up in a cave or passage, or you were just, somebody dug a hole 6 foot deep, put you in the bottom of it, and put all the dirt in front of you. And, once you have, 5 or 6 tons of dirt on your chest, like you kind of lose the will to dig upwards anymore.
Yeah.
And you just suffocate to death because every time you take a breath out and your chest compresses, thousands of pounds of dirt make sure that you can't expand your chest again, and you just suffocate very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Being sealed in a coffin wasn't common unless you were a noble that could afford a coffin.
Oh.
Usually you were just buried in a hole if it was an execution. The last one is the garrote. The garrote?
Garrote?
Garrote, yeah, that's how to say it. Mostly used in Spain. It was just a thin rope, or it was an iron bar around the back of a chair, and it was just tightened until somebody died. Okay. That's all I have for that. So that's all the historical executions. Maybe next time I'll revisit and do modern executions and actually go into the philosophy of the death penalty. But this is just really, an anthropological look at all the weird ways humans have come up with like killing each other and the reasons why they deserve death.
Some of those are very creative.
Yeah. Oh, and also I purposely didn't do any sacrifice type stuff because I want that to be its own episode. Because ancient peoples like doing mass sacrifices and all that needs its own episode because I want to go into the ancient religion side of that.
Or like torture methods.
Oh yeah, torture methods is one. Man.
Yeah.
I think we did an episode on that. Medieval medical practices.
Yeah.
Basically torture, but
yeah. And like there was a bunch of things where they could either be used as a death penalty device or they can be used as a torture device. I didn't include any of them. I tried to include the ones that were strictly death penalty.
Yeah.
But stuff like the Spanish tickler and stuff like the Iron Maiden.
Yeah.
I can just think of like modern ones.
Yeah.
Not ancient. Like lethal injection, electric chair,
Yeah.
shit like that. But that's modern. That's not.
Well, I guess the reason I want to give more room for them is because they have interesting things about like pharmaceutical and chemical engineering companies like protesting against making like the chemicals to kill and stuff like that. Like I find the business ethics of that like really interesting.
We'll talk about that in a different episode.
Yeah, bring me in on that one.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
bring me in on that one.
Okay, yeah, definitely. I'll
like like a company protesting the making of the lethal injection drug?
One of the compounds used to administer lethal injections, the company refused to sell it to the penal system, so because they knew what they would use it for.
Yeah,
Fuck all the people who are like, firm is always corrupt. They don't. Fuck all those people.
They were restricting access to phenobarbital.
Yeah. Okay, you know more than I do.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but phenobarbital is like, isn't that used in veterinary medicine quite frequently? Like used like.
Oh yeah.
Well, not anymore. It's not.
Well, valid point.
It's all been replaced by ketamine.
Yeah. And ketamine like substitutes. The
same thing we're taking on the 22nd.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay.
we're taking some ketamine. I'm gonna drop some ketamine on the show.
I'm gonna drop ketamine, mushrooms, and DMT.
Jesus.
I do DMT.
Guys.
I know.
I've already done DMT.
If you don't see me in the new year, it's because I'm trapped in the universe.
You're trapped in a K-hole.
We'll have Richard Bigley on standby. It's okay. He doesn't know first aid.
Yes. I will tell you.
My best friend will be here.
Richard Bigley, I will tell you all of my secret weaknesses so you can dispatch me if needed.
I'm technically first aid AED certified, but I don't think I want to be around for this because there's some